Hey.
Good evening. Welcome. Hey, Ann. How's it
Hey
going?
there, Joe.
Hey, it's the After Hours show. I'm Joe in Norway. I'm joined by retired retired college professor Ann Lee, a community member at the Daily Kos. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of Culture. Evening. Got off to a
Been a long
lively
week.
start.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I think we'll have hopefully we'll have a little less controversial discussion going forward aside of outside of American suburban architectural choices.
We were joking before about McMansions. It was pretty funny, actually.
So last week you mentioned needing to make rice noodles. So I thought
Yeah.
they're kind of involved. They're not exactly the most straightforward thing to make, although they are simple
Mm.
in a way. So I thought I'd make a Viet. Oh, where did I roll out my notes? Sorry about that. Um, yeah, so we're gonna have fun making fun. So
Fun. Yes, indeed.
rice noodles, I assume, originally came from China. The
Yeah.
dish, the rice noodles, the dish I'll make is from North Viet or somewhere around North Vietnam. Um, but I assume all of that influence came from China south and outwards towards the
Yes.
west. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so I thought I'd make some rice noodles, sort of from scratch. I've got rice, and usually it's cut with some kind of coagulant to the rice gives the noodles texture, and the coagulant kind of like tapioca or manioc, cassava plant, or our friend the mung bean. Can use these for even more gelatinous kind of texture. I like those, but I wasn't able to find flour. So you can make this from scratch. You can either do like 80% rice, 20% tapioca. You can do half and half. It's up to you. I don't have one of those fancy schmancy blenders where you could just soak the rice and the tapioca or the beans and then puree it very easily. So I bought flour and soaked rice flour with tapioca flour, and we've got a nice little. John, you're gonna love this slurry. So it should be about more or less the consistency of cream. And what we're going to do is steam those over a special device that we're going to make. So, or retrofit some devices that we have already. But the dish I'll make is with our, oh, John, I'm going to butcher these on par with your excellent pronunciations. Let's see. This is the famed auricularia, or mouse ear mushroom. It's a very cartilaginous texture. So it has it's chewy texture. So these are fresh ones. We had them in the local Asian grocery.
Right.
Similar to black wood ear. I think the more popular one is the black wood ear mushroom. You can find in Asian grocery stores, dried typically, sometimes shredded. So we're gonna saute this with maybe a little pak choi, and this will go with shallots, and we'll put that inside of our rice crepe. We're going to be making crepes, basically, a rice noodle crepe, and we'll have a filling. We'll blanch some bean sprouts for the side, sprinkle some coriander, maybe some chili, some sliced fresh cucumber. My goodness, this just came in from Turkey. These beauties. These they're not seedless, but they're so small. They're just so crisp and full of chlorophyll. They're lovely. But what we need to do, with the help of my assistant, I'm going to clear all of this out of the way. Part of the recipe today requires a pair of scissors, shears, some sheets you got lying around, or a pillowcase in this case, and some bungee cords. I think bungee cords will work. So what we're going to do is we're going to retrofit my bamboo steamer and my pressure cooker. Pressure cooker is quite practical. If you see the rim where the lock fits around,
Flange.
it's the flange. That's the word I was looking for. So what we can do, we can take our sheet, which we're going to cut into squares, take our bungee cord, find it. There we go. No. Basically going to strap the bungee cord around it. Something like this. Pull it tight and flat. And then we're going to have the steam in here and then pour the batter on top, cover it, and then wait a couple minutes for it to steam, and then scrape it off with a chopstick or something. And hopefully it won't, hopefully my cooking equipment has a higher thread count than my bed.
Yeah.
So hopefully it won't drip all the way through. That's the plan anyways. So we have to cut these into squares and then hook up all of the system. That's the plan we got going so far.
Okay. It's not like you could use cheesecloth with that, right?
The cheesecloth is a little too
Open.
porous.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, maybe there's some. I've tried the regular kitchen linen. That didn't work because it was too abrasive, so it stuck to the fabric. And I tried So what was the fabric yesterday? Some kind of khaki type fabric yesterday, and that didn't work either. So you can do it in a pan, frying pan, but the reason why steaming is the preferred method is that it gets rid of the raw uncooked rice flavor. So the steam will dissipate the flavor from the noodle when you cook it. Whereas if you do it in the pan, you're not getting that flavor removed. But anyway, we've got the world is still raging.
It's still there, more or less. There were several things to rant about today. One of which is I found this graph that I may show here. Yeah, it is. It's a Washington Post graph that shows that cumulative United States COVID death rates, and they correspond. That top line there corresponds to correlates with red states. So if you were a kind of Trump person, there tends to be a higher death rate in terms of vaccine resistance or whatever. So blue states tended to be healthier in that sense, or have a lower mortality rate than red states.
So they have been singled out.
Yeah, it's pretty clear, and it's a self-selection, anti-vaccine resistance, and the results, of course, are still with us in the sense that measles is now returned in a lot of places. Resistance to what is the standard requirement for kids going to school is the MMR, measles, whatever, rubella. Vaccine that kids have to take before they are let into school. So anyway, that was just interesting. Because the question was, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And the Republicans have recycled this sort of trope, which came up in the Reagan era, essentially. Reagan used it as a cudgel against Jimmy Carter. And needless to say, there was double-digit inflation and a recession and a whole bunch of things that were there that to attack Carter on. And so it was effective in the sense of ask, are you better off now? And I mean, it is a kind of standard question, usually brought against the against the regime in power. So anyway, that's one of the issues. The other issues, of course, are to talk about Ukraine. And it's election time in Russia, and the Ukrainians have been using a variety of methods, initiatives that would challenge the fact that Putin, he does have an opposition. There are like 3 other candidates, but they're not going to win. It's pretty obvious, and there is a side story that may seem conspiratorial, but the Russians have figured out a way to rig votes, and they're moderately open about their ability to do that. So that's one thing. The other matter is, of course, that the Ukrainians have decided to provide a variety of disruptions to remind the Russian people that there is a war going on. And that should have an effect on people's sort of support for Putin, who's going to get another 6 years. Essentially, he is dictator for life, and so that other 6 years will come up, and that's sort of the optimum for authoritarian dictators. There is an election, and it does appear to represent the people. but it's not very democratic in the sense that as we saw, people were disqualified from running for a variety of reasons, and there was an anti-war, several actually anti-war candidates who were disqualified for whatever arbitrary reasons. So that was that. The Ukrainians decided they would support certain incursions into the Russian into the Russian nation, and various refineries have been attacked by drones for the last 3 days, very deep into Russia. So a variety of things that also drove up the price slightly for gasoline. But there have been drone attacks of a variety of sorts that across Russia in a fairly wide variety of on this side of the Urals generally. So that's been happening. The Ukrainians have supported some actually kind of strange groups. There are some Chechens who are have a kind of separatist deal that they're kind of left over from the well, without getting too deep down that hole. There are some Chechens. There are right-wing Russians who would like to well, they would like to overthrow the Russian government. There aren't very many of them, and they exist as a kind of sort of free Russia kind of. This is reminiscent of the White Russians of the Soviet period. But there are a couple of those kinds of groups. Essentially, what they were able to do, I think, is bring, and these folks are Russians. That is, they're Russian speakers. They're from Russia. They're being supported by the Ukrainians, and they're about the size of a brigade, a couple of brigades. And so they've come across the border in the northern part near Volgograd, and they've done this before. They made several incursions last year, I think. And what they do is they go across, they take a little bit of territory, mess with people, blow things up, and then they come back. And they're not going to hold the territory. Well, they could hold the territory, but it doesn't seem to me that there's any spontaneous resistance, local resistance that would support them. So essentially, they come across in force. They're fairly well armed. And they have, some of them have local knowledge, so they go in and they do stuff. And so I'm not sure whether it gets a lot of news coverage, but it does resemble the same kinds of resistance that we saw in the Chechen War a while back. And of course, as I said, there is this Chechen resistance that is not identified with the ruling party in Chechnya. So it is a very kind of strange grouping of people. They're not a very big component of that, but as I said, they have done a little thing. They have their own flags and markings, and they have their own PR in that particular sense. So you can see that there's a strange diversity, and they are kind of wing, which is, Russia for Russians kind of stuff. Then there is that kind of nativism. I mean, Navalny was also a kind of nativist as well. So some of this is quite motivated by a certain type of ethnic support. So that's been happening, that because of the election, which is going to go on for a couple of days, and they're trying to embarrass Putin, and perhaps that will happen. A variety of other occurrences for the last week. We talked about a couple of weeks ago about ships being sunk, planes being shot down. The war continues. The Russians have generally been moving forward, but as I mentioned the last time, they're making very small, incremental kinds of moves across the border. This happens in a kind of interesting simultaneous thing where an Oscar for a foreign documentary, and I think a lot of that has its own kind of thing. A ship that was run aground, I think on the lower Dnieper River in Kherson was being used as an observation post by the Russians. And so the Ukrainians decided that to try out their new French glide bombs and dropped a bunch on this one little ship. So it's quite spectacular to see this sort of ship sitting sort of in the middle of the river being completely destroyed, or at least attacked. So that kind of happened. It at least appears in a spectacular way. And as I said, there's a variety of groups, a pro-Ukrainian Russian Volunteer Corps, or RDK, the Freedom of Russian Legion, LSR, a Siberian battalion. They're limited cross-border incursions into Belgorod and Kursk, the oblasts, and so that's been kind of going on. The casualty remains high. It generally it still has all the makings of fairly complete infantry fighting vehicles that are being destroyed significantly on the Russian side. A variety of the first Abrams tank was destroyed last week, and they say that it wasn't a fairly new one, but there are only 30 of them that are in the Ukrainian army, so that was part of that. As I said, these particular resistance groups have declared that they have a kind of a buffer. They want to create a kind of buffer zone that might become an autonomous state that would resemble, in the same sense, that over a front that looks like Transnistria on the Moldovan side, but it is unclear as to what their real effect is, and how much of an impact they actually are going to have. Needless to say, this is all coordinated against the current Russian elections, which is the reason why there's a significant Russian activity on the other side, and some propaganda, because they took back Avdiivka and some other territories, but really only a small amount. There's a side story about the use of chemical weapons. It's not serious chemical weapons in the sense of real, like nerve gas or whatever, but they throughout the war, the Russians have tended to use the kinds of things are anti-personnel gas, that is like CS tear gas, etc., and which is disabling and problematic, and does violate international conventions. So that's another story that has sort of always been there in terms of the war. The other piece of news from this coming week is a commitment of several $1 billion to reinforce defensive arrangements on the Ukrainian side. There's much attention in terms of last year's defensive lines created by the Russians to prevent a Ukrainian counteroffensive, the 3 layers of dragon's teeth and blah, blah, blah. Similarly, the works, that is infrastructure of some kind, pillboxes, a variety of other structures are going to be probably created to slow down any Russian advance. It's fairly clear that the Russians are still not as organized as they should be, even though some of the literature has said that they've learned and adapted from the current the 2 years of conflict. Now that we're in the 3rd year of conflict, and of course it's an anniversary and a variety of other things, but all those things are going on at the same time. Predictions on trying to force a ceasefire were interesting only because people tried to spin the Pope's comment on using in reference to white flags. That is not. I think you can imagine that people would spin the mention of a white flag as a kind of surrender, as opposed to an armistice, which not necessarily identical. And so there's a little bit of kerfuffle in that. And of course, the other issues just simply because it's the Pope. And so there's that kind of resistance. So that sort of flurry of information popped up this coming week. So that was also an interesting problem. How is our food going, Joe? That looks like
Yeah,
filling.
got the it looks like little ears. They're very just like cartilage, funky little mushroom. Saute these a bit. Blanched bok choy to add with it. We stretched our steamer drum. So we just put a bungee cord around it, stretched essentially a pillowcase across the bamboo steamer, and then also for the pressure cooker. You can use any wide based pot. Do the same thing. So once it comes up to steam, then we'll start making a pancake, crepe, noodles.
Yum. Yum. This is much like those kind of discs that some Asian food stores have that are rice noodle. They're dried discs that you have to wet to so that you could roll up spring rolls, right?
Yeah. So like these ones.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're essentially making this, but fresh.
Yes. Now I'm hungry again. Anyway. I guess I'll do my little rant here about I mean, there are several rants that can be done. I put up something today about Dr. Craig Wright, Craig Stanley Wright, I think his name, Craig Stephen Wright, not to be confused with Stephen Wright, the comedian, but Dr. Wright is decided because no one, Satoshi Nakamoto, the sort of originator, the creator of Bitcoin, has never really sort of revealed himself over the last decade, and this may be simply a pseudonym for a whole group of folks who have done the math and the programming just to create Bitcoin. Now, the reality, of course, is that that they want it to be a kind of open source deal, and what Craig Stephen Wright, an Australian Dr. Wright, has done. Now, he's a doctor because he has a second doctorate. His first doctorate is a theology degree, so there's something a little bit weirder going on there that I don't want to get too far into, but it just seems there's something else going on. And he decided about 8 or 10 some odd years ago to claim that he was the creator of Bitcoin. And so there's no actual Satoshi Nakamoto who's going to pop up and say, well, no, that's just not true. This is my stuff. So he essentially was kind of poaching the ownership of Bitcoin. But today, or yesterday, a British court decided that all of his claims were false, and the cryptocurrency community is quite happy about this, simply because this kind of making up that, oh well, I'm the real blah 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 is sort of interesting, but highly problematic. And needless to say, the most of the evidence was on the side of Nakamoto, who may or may not be an actual person. So, but I think it ends sort of the any particular kind of claims of development and stuff, and there are various organizations that support this idea of a kind of open source approach to. I mean, that's sort of the whole point of Bitcoin, that it's not identified with very specific things, that it's a really much more organic kind of relationship with an internet that is much more infinite in that particular sense, rather than one that has a kind of somebody who's going to go in and claim that he owns everything, which is not true. There's a lot of technical evidence that showed that Wright just sort of made stuff up. The simple example, of course, would be that the original paper that outlines the formation or creation of the white, it's a white paper, it's a Bitcoin white paper, was produced in the program, the word processing program called OpenOffice, and not in LaTeX, which is Donald Knuth's a program to do academic word processing, and they're very different. They're completely different programs. And for example, the white paper, the real Satoshi would know that. Dr. Wright has insisted that it was produced in LaTeX, and tried to, in vain, to support the story with false documents. So just the fact that he was creating all these this kind of set of false documents for a variety of other things, including emails and a bunch of other things, that just doesn't work. And there's plenty of evidence. And it does get down to a kind of weird scholarly sort of thing, but it's just fascinating. Now, it doesn't change the value of Bitcoin, which is still problematic for all kinds of reasons. But it's just interesting that at least certain things are being sort of institutionalized in that sense. But equally so, there's problematics. So today, David K. Johnson, who notably does other things, it's interesting that David K. Johnston is interested in this from the point of view that this cover, he does stuff talking about Trump. Is that cocoa bean futures as a commodity outperformed Bitcoin. So they're just better investments out there right now. And this is pointed out by a Swiss financial journalist. So that's fascinating. And in fact, they convicted someone in a Washington federal court, a guy who had founded a cryptocurrency mixing service known as Bitcoin Fog. He's been convicted of helping to launder tens of millions of dollars from dark markets known for selling illegal drugs. So the real use of Bitcoin to do sort of dark web activity is still there. It's not really changed by this one little piece of information. But at least there's a certain accountability, because I think it's pretty wild when somebody decides, oh, I'm the real creator of Bitcoin, and tries to create all this sort of hijacking of a kind of open resource, and that's it's just amazing that he had the gall to do it. But this happens all the time, right? People decide to change their driver's license so that they're Jesus Christ or God or something other thing, and that creates a real kind of problem. So anyway, that's one of the little things I was talking about. And then I mentioned before the other, the fact that we're not, we're actually quite better off than we were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, it was the worst parts of the beginnings of COVID. And I think that people should just remind themselves how awful it was. Backups at mortuaries, refrigerator trucks, healthcare workers dying on the job, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And I think we're much better off than that now. I think most of us would agree with that. And it's just so odd that Republicans would try and create this whole fog of amnesia about the whole issue, when in fact, there's this whole other discourse going on that is incredibly problematic. For example, I pointed out, I posted to the Suffolk Coast that Trump claimed in his interview with Newsmax that everything that he had predicted has come true. That this is Trump's claim, that he's proven to be, sort of prescient, almost prophetic, and like a real prophet. And so this is that sop to the evangelicals, but it is it's weird that there's this kind of strange doubling down, and that the claiming 4 years, are you better off? I mean, most of us are better off than 4 years ago, and it's kind of hard to prove the contrary. And considering that the mass death toll is probably in the hundreds of thousands, if not the million. The claim is up to 1 million. That may or may not be true, but more people have died than should have died during the period, simply because a whole bunch of things suggested by CDC were not used simply for political reasons, and it is the politics of.
Is there any talk of criminality?
Well, I would assert that it's criminal, and in fact, if you brought a kind of class action, I think we could actually probably prove it. And needless to say, it would require an incredible amount of resources to do it. And that's kind of part of the issue as well. So much doesn't get litigated in the country, simply because it requires resources. You need to have deep pockets in order to do this, or you need, like Trump is, to be able to convince rubes that they should, rather than support political campaigns, they're really paying for people's legal work. So all these, for example, the delays, if you haven't heard the latest news, it's a kind of compromise that Fani Willis will get to stay on the prosecution of the Georgia RICO case, the Trump RICO case. And she had her boyfriend, her special counsel, submit his resignation, so he's no longer on the team. But whatever compromise that is, that's the compromise that occurred. And essentially, she had a press conference to say that keep our eye on the ball and get back to work, which is kind of what has to happen. I one assumes that yes, carry on. Sorry,
we have a little problem.
Uh-oh.
I don't think my thread count in the kitchen is high enough.
Oh my gosh.
Oh no.
Dear.
I kept pouring, and it's just going right through. Right through. So it's thick on one end and thin on the edges, thick in the middle.
That looks pretty good though. No, that looks okay.
Yeah. So it looks more like a calamari.
I mean, it could be worse. So yeah, at least it's congealed, right?
Yeah, it's working, but I think I need to double up. I'll take this one off and put it on there, and hopefully that'll be a little bit better. But that's the thing. You put it on for a couple minutes, and then you've got rice noodles.
I'm hungry. Gosh. For those who don't eat this sort of stuff, this is, it's lunch food for me. It's snack. It's the best of snack food, as well as it can be used for entrees and full meals. But, Anyway,
We just transfer these to a greased plate to be done serving later. But we'll do some retrofitting here soon. We'll check on this one, see how this one's doing. This is a little better, it seems. Still have the still too thick. I can't quite get them thin enough, but they work.
it's okay if they're, well, in my history, the Cantonese versions are much thicker.
Mm.
Than, for example, the Vietnamese ones, which are usually a lot thinner.
I was trying to get that not paper thin, but the one where you could put the filling in and then it'll just drape over it like a wet cloth.
Yes, that's one way of doing it. The other way is in the more Cantonese version of it. It's pretty thick stuff, more like lasagna, lasagna noodles. So and it's very rare.
Are those the ones that are rolled up into little logs, like
yes,
fist size ones?
Yes. And are quite tasty. I mean, they're just a more perhaps baroque version of the spring roll, which in the Southeast Asian context is much thinner, and of course non-deep fried, whatever. So all those healthy.
All right. Let's see if we can fix this.
Okay. It's pretty clear that Mary Trump has accused Donald Trump of a criminal act. Glenn Kirshner has said that you could actually prosecute Trump with a second-degree murder charge because of the handling of the
COVID.
Of COVID. So not that anyone is going to do that, although it seems that you could probably do that with a sufficiently activist Department of Justice. So in the Trump criminal cases, charges are filed in the election inquiry in Georgia. We're finally getting around to the point with respect to the charges being filed. In the federal January 6th case, charges have been filed, but there is, of course, the fighting about the issues of immunity, etc. And so delays have been occurring everywhere, and we're not close to a actual trial, except in the Manhattan hush money case, which will come up next week, because the trial date is there and it's going to happen. In the classified documents.
Speaking of hush, James, mute your mic.
Excuse me, I just can't hear you too well.
And you could probably boost your mic as well.
Right. Just yammer.
Here we go, round two.
I'm raising it so I can hear Ann, but then when you talk, it's like really loud.
Yammering on. The classified documents case has gotten a little bit more complicated because of the identification of Trump, Mar-a-Lago employee number 5, who just simply corroborated the story of boxes of stuff being moved at the same time that Trump was being confronted on the issue of obstruct or demanding the DOJ and the FBI were demanding material. So there's a pretty clear instance with a sufficient number of witnesses that boxes got moved. What was in the boxes is a whole nother question, and whether they went to Bedminster or not is a whole nother question. So there's probably a lot of issues. The other major thing that was going on this past week was Special Counsel Hur was in discussing in the House, sort of the House committee was attempting to try and suggest, and not that you could impeach him for it, that Biden was old and doddering, et cetera, et cetera. They're trying to move that forward, despite the State of the Union performance by Biden. And so on the committee, the Democrats decided to just say, that to accuse her of presenting a biased presentation, simply because the transcripts were now made available. The DOJ released the transcripts, which revealed that her actually said in the, you could see that it wasn't as this discussion of faulty memory, et cetera, was a little bit biased. And, it's just, the original front end framing of it was that Biden couldn't remember his son's, the date of his son's death. And I think he couldn't remember the year. He definitely remembered the day. But that wasn't revealed in the reporting. And so there was this sort of front end by the mainstream media to try and sell the age issue. And it was pretty clear as the Democrats went through it to say that, they're not the same thing, that the Florida documents case and the Biden University of Pennsylvania Center Biden document materials were not identical. That is that once Biden figured out, or he was confronted with that materials had to be returned, he acted immediately, whereas in Trump's case, he actually not only wasn't compliant, but he actually moved documents around, hid stuff, even tried, with respect, there's a whole suggestion that he tried to destroy the server room where some of the documents were. So it's just not the same thing. And but yet there's a lot of flurry, and that's kind of what we have. So we have still 4 major cases with a bunch of subsidiary things that are going to go on. A refinement in the Georgia RICO case where some of the counts were thrown out, but Trump is still on the hook for the phone call, so that hasn't really been touched. So essentially, the things that will send Trump to jail or prison are all still in place. It's just the delays, and ultimately the issue of that he could pardon himself or order the DOJ to withdraw, that all can happen. Fortunately, the Georgia case has its own complications because the Georgia legislature has put in something where they're trying to investigate Fani Willis on the issue of misuse of funds. So there's a whole bunch of other things that would occur relative to Georgia legal system that may be, and there's a lot of charges about how Judge McCarthy is not being, sufficiently fair, or that he's, been too easy on the claims of the defendants. Well, it's just much more complicated. I mean, you have 19 defendants. It's fairly complicated. So the choice of a RICO prosecution probably, was the thing that Fani Willis was most experienced with. So in some ways that was comfortable for her, because I think, other kinds of prosecutions could have occurred, but this is probably the best way to move forward, despite the fact that the Georgia legal system could, mess the entire thing up, which it already has in that sense.
I busted a gut. Wait. They're not quite holding together as well as that plan.
Some assembly required.
Yes. Oh, there we go.
Probably doesn't assemble as well on the platen there.
I was trying. Say that again.
Shouldn't you assemble it off the griddle, so to speak?
Well, you can do it either way, but
Uh-huh.
it's just less of a hassle if you do it right on here.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I tried to go thinner this time,
Hmm.
and then it just there's something wrong. This is not the ideal fabric to have over it.
Yeah.
So work in progress. We got to go back to the drawing board again. One more.
Still pretty good, and it certainly
Yeah,
makes me hungry. So
there we go.
we're about 50 minutes in, and other things are going to happen tonight. Uh, we should mention that Twilight Zone is going to come up in a little over 30 minutes. John, can you tell us what's going to happen?
Certainly. Twilight Zone tonight is a very good episode starring Martin Balsam, wonderful actor, very naturalistic. Um, he is, I would say, a bit obsessed in this episode. He gets he gets fired from his job, and he decides to take his work home with him. And his wife is not pleased, and it creates a lot of friction, you might say, in the family.
Did the Twilight Zone make him do it? Oh, no
Uh,
spoilers.
no spoilers. No
All
spoilers.
right. Note, of course, that on Sunday we'll have Columbo. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, John?
Yes. So, no.
Okie dokie.
That was Moida.
It would, yes, there will be a
Somebody will
murder.
get killed. Somebody will
Yes.
get killed.
Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. There are plenty of other things. Harsh is going to talk a little bit more about the Hindus at tonight. Harsh, you there?
Yeah, yes, Professor Ryan. So yeah, another episode of Discovery of India. This time we are ending the story of Mahabharat, and we'll revisit a traditional folk dance from the southern part of India, like from Kerala. It's called Kathakali. So there is it shows the story is represented in that form for certain parts. Yeah, it's just like an ending of the big mythology, basically.
Mm.
Yep.
All righty.
Oh, butchering him.
I'm hungry again. Damn it. I don't have an Asian food source near me where I get a lot of that stuff. There used to be some at a local, very large supermarket. I'm sure I could probably find one if I was really hunting this stuff down. But this is stuff you would normally get in more consistent Asian enclaves.
You could probably get some rice flour, no? Or
Oh, I have rice flour and stuff. I'm gonna try and produce it myself. I just it's all an experiment, and I'm grateful that you've shown us how to do this.
Ish. So, well, presentation maybe not. It'll probably taste good, but presentation maybe not.
Oh, it's okay.
what I would
A
appreciate
little
it.
soy over that, and it's good to go for a lot of people.
Mhm.
The other version of the snack food without cooking the filling, it is simply all daikon and bean sprouts and green onions and that kind of stuff. Spring roll sort of stuff.
Oh, that's what I had. I had some. I think I may have some mint. Put fresh mint with this as well. That's nice. And I just made a reduction of some shiitake and
oh, nice
chili.
Yes, yes. Oh, yum.
I just want to comment on the "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" thing that you were talking about. You should noted that I think it was a month or two ago, Trump was saying not that, but are you better off than you were 5 years ago?
Oh, yes.
Oh, conveniently omitting that last year of his presidency, which had a major health crisis.
Oh, we love the dog.
It was a brilliant sleight of hand, but I don't know if people bought it.
No, because that, the 4-year metric is pretty much, it's been a standard for decades.
Yeah.
And that's just not going to work.
Yeah, apparently he does have slight hands.
Indeed. Oh, and on the Bitcoin thing, Trump mentioned with his sneakers that you could pay for them with Bitcoin, which really adds to the whole grift element.
Well, there we go. We got the
All right.
rice noodle rolls with mouse ear mushroom and pak choy,
Yum.
fried onion, coriander, steamed or blanched bean sprouts, fresh cucumber.
Yum, yum, yum.
It's very delicate, and you can increase the gelatinousness of it by upping the tapioca and reducing the rice, or you can substitute mung bean flour or mung bean starch actually, and that's even more so. Very delightful dish.
I can hardly wait to try that myself.
Mm.
We're getting close to the end. We do a lot of stuff here at the autonomouscollective.net. Hopefully other folks will get interested, come join us, share your cooking, if nothing else,
I'm working towards getting us on the indie web out there. The old web ring world will catch up with the technology.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many different talents of folks here. It's really actually an amazing little place. And if we all we're all have little talents that we can contribute, I looking forward to new and more interesting things in the future. There's a writing workshop tomorrow at 2ish. I guess I'm going to do this and that at 6 o'clock. And Weekly Marks is at 3 on Sunday. On Monday, there will be sports and writing and this and that. And we've actually shown some other interesting things. Palestine was last night. Some really an interesting live stream presentation on some very famous people in the history of the Palestine.
Arab Barghouti, the son of Marwan Barghouti, who is a political prisoner in Israel, came on to speak and talked about his father's situation and moving forward. I think the main thing to take away from what he said was to not focus on trying to convince the staunch Zionists, but reach towards those centrists, those people who are a little wishy-washy, the people that are not quite clear or understand what exactly is going on and are thus more receptive. I think a lot of us try to fight against the walls, basically.
Well, the United States election is also quite similar, considering that there's this vast set of independents and other disaffected folks who need to, get off the fence and
Yeah.
vote for democracy.
Always the goddamn centrists. That extreme center holds so strong. My goodness.
Centrist radicals.
They wear khakis.
Oh, indeed.
Oh. Hook in that shirt, mister. All right, everyone.
All
Thanks a
right.
lot. We'll see you next week.
It's time to go. See you next
Oh,
week. Thanks, everyone. We'll
bon
try to do
appetit.
better.
Yeah.